Court of the Archon. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and faces of the Warhammer 40k setting. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. If you wish to see the channel flourish and possibly take on bigger topics and get better resources, then like and subscribe. But also consider joining our Patreon or throwing a one-off tip in the form of a super thanks if I deserve your bounty. And today, we shall be continuing our delve into the darker elements of the setting, and one would be hard-pressed to find anything as truly grim as the subject we are about to brook. This is a role that only the darkest soul could even consider, let alone perform. It requires an enmity towards all life, a perspective inimical to all life. It means a road of witnessing horrors beyond the experience of or even imagination of any mortal. It means to be in danger every moment of every day, without relent, reprieve, or respite. All due to being the right hand of a being without any virtue whatsoever. Better to be a worshipper of the dark powers than to take on this role. For the dark gods are filled with malice, yet even they are not as fickle as the overlords of the Eladrith Inis. Of course, I can only be talking of the Archons of the Drukhari, the dreaded Dark Eldar, and, in specific, their bodyguards and catspaws, the Court of the Archon. As usual, this video will take the format I have pioneered. There will be a self-written story to assist in your immersion and to contextualize the topic of the entry. Then there will be the hard lore. So let us be about it. From the Bald Library, Presumption. Zeltian was always prettier than I. We were true-born. Unlike the vast majority of our people, we were both carried to term by our mother. Few can afford this luxury. Only the highest are able to support one who is so vulnerable for so long, and even so, even when the protection is beyond question, still few females choose this route. So many have been passed over during their long period of, physical labor, replaced by ardent lovers who have waited decades or more even to have this opportunity. For some, stealing an Archon from their partner is seen as a victory second to none. The vast majority of our young are blurted out of amniotic pods for very practical reasons. To be born is to be carried in the womb of the mother for a tragically long period, and all the while her reflexes and allures are diminished. She is vulnerable. Few can tolerate this scenario. Fewer still would survive it. Only where the blood is strong, the rank certain, the replacement of the mother a thing that would break pacts written in blood, that would cause the fall of an Archon. Only then will they attempt to shore up their dynasty with a true-born heir. Although, unlike the other muling species, we have no real need for this. We are effectively immortal. So pedigree of ancestors matters, but lineage does not. Each child would be a weapon, but one with two edges. The strongest challenge to any Archon can come from their own spawn, after all. It is our way, the path of darkness, the way of the Dark City. The weak are swept away, the strong will rise, no matter their heritage. I can assure you, heritage can still play a strong role in the matter. but only if it is used correctly. So many children have been snuffed out after overestimating their importance, overplaying their hand. So yeah, being true-born is rare indeed. We are better than the half-born. We are superior in every way, or at least some are. In most courts, the siblings battle to be the only heir, proving their place in the Kabal by exterminating their closest competition, their own kin. This is expected. It is normal. It is our way. Imagine the surprise my father felt when he had 2 sons reach maturity. Our father, Lord Zaruthian of the Kabal of the Doleful Dirge, always lacked a certain something. Inspiration is what Zeltian always stated. I knew it was beyond just that. He was a relic of a bygone era. Coming from one of the oldest families, he actually believed that his blood was superior, his mere existence the reason for his position. Oh, he held on to it like a drowning man, but he never, ever took risks. And so, he never increased our holdings, never once gambled his life against the spoils of victory. Some might call this the difference between an experienced head of a Kabal and the willful, short-sighted exuberance of youth. It went so much deeper than that. With every year, I and Zeltian, my elder brother, witnessed his slowly loosening grasp on the reins of power. How? How did we know? Because we were the proof of the matter. Each year, there had been more audacious attempts on our lives. We rarely spoke or interacted at all before our adolescence, but the enemies of our father became bolder. The usual intricate attempts at poisoning or accidents gave way to gauche assassination attempts. When we had been assaulted thrice in the same cycle, our father, Lord Zaruthian, decided to cut his costs. Capable bodyguards are incredibly expensive. So, he combined our details, and we were soon forced into being practically inseparable. Zeltian was tolerable, but he was so much like our father. Stern, witty, adroit, and able, yet without hunger. The drive to take our Kabal forward, further. Always looking at what was at stake, not what we could take. And I knew, one day, he would have to do it, would have to attempt to take my life. I was the only one who could threaten him effectively. So, instead, I took a risk. If Zeltian became the Archon for any reason, then I was dead, unless I changed our relationship. So, over decades, I did just that. I subtly and successfully persuaded him that I was the same as he, but the lesser, of course. Stodgy, tepid, defensive, worried. What I would call cowardly, he would call mature. I became a mirror of him to all, a lesser light that only existed to further amplify his glory. I was the moon to his sun. I threw up a cloak so deep, so wide, so consistent, that even Lord Zaruthian believed it. Only our mother, Lady Camas, saw through the ruse. Only she. So, she had to go. Zeltian did not shed a tear, nor did our father. I regretted the necessity. She could have been of use to me one day. And, in the future, Zeltian melted, when I had the perfect opportunity to see him ended. a sloppy but intensely lucky attempt on our lives, was performed by an obviously paid-off pack of scourges. When travelling between one stronghold and another, they descended on us like a cloud of bats. Our route had obviously been betrayed, our defenders paired off expertly, and suddenly, from a cavalcade of 12 venoms and 3 raiders, we were down to our transport alone. Wanting to fulfill their compact with proof of death, the scourges took out most of our guards, then descended onto the deck of our raider. We were true-born. We were both deadly, and we slew 12 of them with splinter rifles and shredders, our shots filling the skies. But they still came on. The Dracon was the last of our men to die under a crossfire of the scourge's heat lances. He evaporated before our eyes. But they could not use such dire weaponry on Zeltian and I. No corpse, no proof. So they limited themselves to shard carbines from there on in. It was dicey. We both sprang and rolled and dealt out death to them easily, but there were many. When our guard venoms that had been driven away began to return, the scourges threw all caution to the wind, and in that instant they had him. Dead to rights. Zeltian stood with 3 of them around him. All I needed to do was stay where I was, pretend I did not see, and they would have ended him. I would then be the only heir. But I did not. I took that risk. I risked my own existence to save my brother. I shot 2 of them away, leaving him only the one to deal with, which he did most expertly, of course, using his husk blade to desiccate the last scourge. And when it was over and we had reached our destination, he looked at me with an expression equal parts awe and contempt. I will never know for certain. Despite his failings, he is a true-born. He hides his feelings well. I feigned relief at his survival, protested that I was born for this moment alone, and potentially others like it in the future. I quietly and humbly told him of his greatness, that he was the only one in all of Cormorah that could engender such loyalty, for he was 1 in 1,000,000,000,000. I was so convincing. This was the last act in a performance decades in the making. I told him that I was honored to serve such a man. I even kept a straight face when I proclaimed that he would eventually unseat the Lord Vecht himself, and I would be there to bask in his glory. All I wished was to serve him, to be allowed to see that moment, his ascension to the throne most high, and he seemed to believe me. Yet our father, Lord Zeruthian, he did not, and eventually he became impatient. For both of us to survive seemed to indicate a lack of desire and drive, or competence. His children now embarrassed him. One night, he summoned us both to an oubliette. When we stood inside, he made the bold proclamation: only one of us would leave the room alive. A blade then dropped from the ceiling. What he did not know, it was Zeltian and I had invented our own cant. With a flick of my eyebrow, a twist of my lips, I let Zeltian know of my plan. I then attacked him. Zeltian was always fast, but I was faster. He was strong, but I was stronger. He did not know this, of course, as I had always hidden my true skill and attributes from all. Yes, this perceived weakness invited attack, but that meant I was sharper than he. I had more experience in dodging attacks, staying alive. Now, it told. I permitted him to grasp the blade, but then proceeded to take him apart. A sweeping kick that took him from his feet, followed by a backhand as he fell that slammed him into the wall. He recovered quickly and came back at me, slashing and ducking. We danced for an hour. Eventually, I feigned fatigue and let him pummel me. Another risk, but one we had worked out together. We needed to shock father after all. That way he would not look too closely. And I used a knife hand to strike at Zeltian's wrist. He dropped the blade, and I grabbed his long locks and snatched the knife out of the air. I proceeded to push him against the wall and thrust the dagger into his body again and again, without taking a step back. Or so it seemed. But it was only the butt of the blade. Without taking a step back, I watched him theatrically slide down the wall and onto the floor. In the dark, he keeled over and lay on his face. I dropped the blade and stood triumphant. A doorway opened, and there he stood, our father, Lord Zeruthian, sneering. He paced towards me and had to stifle the shrug that he so wanted to use. Father always knew. He always sensed their similarity, and he expected Zeltian to finish me with ease. I took steps backwards in mock fear, as if I thought he would now slay me for my deed. But we both knew this was not to be. He finally had his heir. He walked to me, and I knelt. He reached down to place his hand on my downturned head, to anoint me as his only son. But when he did, I grabbed his arm, held him in position. Zeltian bounced up, swept the blade off the ground, and plunged it into the back of his head. And in that moment, Lord Zeruthian made way for Lord Zeltian, the new Archon of the Kabal of the Doleful Dirge. It took less than a decade for him to forget, longer than I had expected, but even so, the moment was a surprise. It is always interesting when a slug develops a spine. Zeltian was always prettier than I. So we agreed to divide and conquer. He would always be the true power, would caress and carouse in the spotlight of the courts. I would take the tedious task off his shoulders. I would be his hatchet, his blade. I would serve as I had always dreamed I could, and every one of my actions would be for his greater glory. He would balk when I initiated confrontations, but never demurred from claiming the glory when all went to plan. Our holdings increased tenfold in that time. Our forces expanded, and all who fought knew my bounty. But Zeltian only knew of that which I informed him. Oh, he had his spies, of course. He was still kin, but he did not know that I had already bought them, with prizes they could never hope to gain from him. He was the target. I had a free hand. Then finally, his egotism won out. He countermanded me in the planning session for our first real space raid. It was not the action itself, but the intent. He was ready to discard me. So, I struck first. A scheme with many facets. It was preceded by a week of smaller attacks and explosions, poisonings and assassinations. To Zeltian, it was as if our entire operation was being torn asunder. He could not pinpoint who he had annoyed, nor where the attacks hailed from. Always the center of attention, he was consumed with his position at the greater court of the city. Could not understand that the genesis of the attacks was not a lord above him in the pecking order. And in those short 7 days, he consumed himself. And I I made sure it was his last loyal retainers who were always the victims in the assaults. Chasing his tail, reaching out to every single contact and resource, he was shocked and terrified in equal measure. And in his folly, he turned to the one person who had always held true. Me. When advised we retreat to our Bastille at the very edge of the city, he puffed himself up and decried how this would look to the court. But he acquiesced to my request nonetheless. And there, in the fortress I had made, were the guards I had hired, surrounded by men who were bought and paid for. He looked on in stunned silence as I drew my blade on him. He looked to his guards and cried for them to defend him. "Destroy Medrosian! Bring me his head!" Not one of them moved an inch. I smirked as I paced around him, allowing him time to draw his own blade and ready himself. I needed to make an example. We recorded the moment for dissemination across the entire Kabal, and then further. I chided him for his weakness as we crossed blades. I derided him as I took slither after slither of his skin from his body, each stroke a work of art. Zeltian had spent his time learning the forked tongue of court. I had learned the true way of the warrior, had even trained with an incubi for a period. I took his head from his shoulders, only when he looked like he would break down and beg for his life. Nothing could destroy our house more quickly. So his head landed at my feet. It was over. I was now the Archon of the doleful dirge. And the next day I executed every last guard who witnessed my enthronement. How could I trust anyone who could permit my brother to be slain? How could I trust anyone who would permit their Archon to be killed? How could I trust any dark kin with my existence? For in the dark city of Kormorah, only the strong survive, and the difference between the strong and the weak can be as simple as bad timing. And everyone, every last member of our race, has their price. So, we are here to discuss the Court of the Archon. But what in specific is an Archon? The Eldari have more than one string to their bow, more than one faction that make up their greater species. The craft-worlders are the closest one might come to the concept of the typical Eldar, as seen in the setting. Travelling the void in their continent-sized craft-worlds, they may not be the most numerous. They are just the element that is most often confronted by the Imperium or other active Xenos in the galaxy. Or so people think. Even then, they are not the loudest of the factions really. It is the Eldar Corsairs that are actually the most encountered of all of their species. They ply the space lanes and hunt convoys and cruisers as they deem fit. And rare is the clemency given by such Eldar. There are others, of course, the Exodites who are galactic Amish, forswearing near all of the technology and art that made their race so deadly. Living on idyllic maiden worlds, their numbers may be vast, but who could tell, as they make practically no participation in the universal ballet. The dancers of Segora, the Harlequins, may be recruiting faster than ever before, may well be forming into a horde, but even still, they are not often encountered by any who subsequently live. The last branch of the Eldari tree, the race we are here to discuss, are the Eladrith Enis, the Drukhari, the Dark Eldar. They are terrible beings that have a disdain for life and every other species so pronounced and profound that they are the truest villains in this universe. as I have said before, none are as hated as the Dark Eldar. None. They were the real reason that a dark goddess was born. They are more her scions and priesthood than any who bow to Slaanesh directly. They are effectively immortal, as long as they pay the fiddler its due. To witness unspeakable cruelty and the sorrow it creates is the only way that they can feed their slowly depleting souls. For each Dark Eldar has a hole in their soul, their connection to Slaanesh, that allows her to slowly suck their soul stuff no matter where they may be. Constantly gnawing on their animus, consuming them bit by bit, they will become ghasts, ghouls that lurch and scream in agony all night long. Not dead, but certainly not alive. Yet, there is one way that they can augment their souls, to regain enough to fend off the predations of she who thirsts. It is to witness cruelty and the suffering of other sentient beings. Simply by drinking in this depravity with their eyes, it somehow refuels their souls, giving them a preternatural beauty, returning a youthful sheen to even the most antediluvian of their kind. But the ever-consistent rule of diminishing returns applies even to this process. Where once a simple execution would sate a Drukhari child, eventually they must perform and expose themselves to horrors of increasing barbarity and brutality, each and every display needing to be just that touch darker each and every time. A downward spiral of degradation. When one considers how old the Dark Eldar can become, the implied savagery and perversion would make it impossible for me to explain, nor tolerable for you to hear. Let us just leave it at that. The Dark Eldar dwell in the webway, an alternate dimension created by the Old Ones. Neither real space or the warp, it is a labyrinth of tendrils and large nodes, some so expansive that they can be the home to entire populations. In this dimension, the city ports that were once the domain of the Eldar were dominated and conglomerated into the one, the Dark City. It is the home and center of power of the Dark Eldar. It is Khormorah. With stolen suns locked above it, their power is near infinite. Their technology is equal to that of ancient days, but twisted to torture and hedonism. The denizens of the Dark City are not merely Dark Eldar, but a plethora of Xenos races. Some are slaves who are bred to provide fodder for the nightmarish appetites of their captors. Others are giving standing amidst the courts and towers of the Dark Kin. In such a realm, treachery is as common as cruelty, and no one can be trusted, not even kith and kin. Nobody. So what is an Archon? There are few true roots to power within the Dark City of Khormorah. The most ancient of their beings are the homunculi. Previously many were the nobility that ruled the ports of old. Now they are artists of pain, masters of dark resurrection. To be one of them is to be a powerhouse and Dr. Frankenstein combined. But their competition comes from within. They joust and jockey for power and prestige, but mostly amongst their own kind. They do not challenge the Dark Prince, Asdrubal Vecht. There are the witch cults who perform in the combat arenas nightly to as many as can pay their fee. Deadly and dire, these women are death incarnate, ballerinas of butchery. Theirs are cadres of killers that are sisterhoods too, well, in that they allow no others to slay or abuse their number, yet their own rivalries are as likely to take their lives as any of the men or monsters they battle on the sands. Combined entirely, the witch cults are not as potent as their overlords, and they know it. Many others there are, mercenaries of the skies or beastmasters or so, the sects of power like the incubi, effective and important, but small in numbers. They are not true contenders to the lordship of this place. But the cream of the crop, those at the top, all hail from the Kabals. A Kabal is a band of Dark Eldar warriors that control vast assets by the usual ways: theft, plunder, blackmail, protection, slander, addiction, assassination, and straight slaughter. Before, the Eldar nobility ruled Khor Mora as they had done the ancient Eldar Empire. But one night, a slave rebelled and eventually walked the ladder of power, until he kicked it away and rewrote the entire book. Asdrubal Vect formed the first Kabal, the Kabal of the Black Heart, but others formed for or against him. Despite this customary and wholly predictable schism amongst the Dark Eldar, Vect still managed to break the entrenched power of the houses and replace them lock, stock, and barrel. He took Khor Mora for his own and has ruled ever since. The different Kabals rise and sink in power always, from within or without, by treachery. The man or woman who is the ruler of a Kabal is called an Archon. Like a prince or monarch in any feudal society, they are absolute rulers of their Kabal. To challenge an Archon is a death sentence. If you have to challenge them, then you have already lost. It is a swift and silent knife in the night, or the last meal that tasted slightly off, that is the most likely reason for a change in Archon. Betrayal. It is born into the Dark Kin. Their connection to she who thirsts, Slanesh, is a curse upon them that has swallowed any potential they ever had of returning to grace. An Archon is a Caesar, with the popularity of a Caligula. They are despised by all, as no Dark Eldar or any of their retinues have any love in their hearts. They all work together for one reason, and one reason alone: strength in numbers. That if they do not have protection, they are fodder. Every leader in a Kabal eyes up the one above them, while keeping a beady eye on all those beneath. At every level of every hierarchy in their society, there is betrayal and a depth of gamesmanship that would make Machiavelli question his own cunning. As I hope the previous tale illustrated, no Dark Eldar can trust another under any circumstances whatsoever. Every single one of them has a price. Most often, it is someone else's power. Simply put, the only way to survive in the ocean that is Khor Mora is to become an apex predator, a great white shark. To be an Archon is to have the entire world hate you and want to take your position. A man without protection would not last an hour. But if they cannot trust their own, then who do the Archons employ to act as their bodyguards? So, let us now break down the beings that most often make up a court of the Archon as a battle formation. Let us kick off with the most simple: the Lahmian. A Lahmian is a Dark Eldar, so one would not usually think they could be trusted. Yet, unlike the Incubi sect, the Sisterhood of Lilitu is a religious order, and their word is their bond. They do not consider themselves candidates for any temporal power. Theirs is a religious study of poisons, potions, and stimulants of every shade and stripe. They emulate a being known as Shemesh, father of poisons. It is unknown if he is a dark muse or a historic figure. In reality, it makes little difference. Their main use is to protect the Archon from poisons, and to dish out subtle, deadly revenges on any he deems his enemies. A Lahmian is a dervish in combat, like any Dark Eldar, yet she will have a Shemeshi blade that can kill at a touch. Hidden pockets of ghastly poison secreted across every inch of its blade. They are hired to an Archon by the Sisterhood. So, of all the Dark Eldar in Khor Mora, they are perhaps the most honest, and certainly the only ones an Archon could ever begin to trust. The Urghul. Originating in the dark realm of Shaddam, the Urghouls are the rabid bloodhounds of the court. With the usual 2 arms and 2 legs, they seem humanoid, but move much more like canines or felines in many regards. scratching across the ground as they bound on all fours towards their prey. An Urgul has skin as tough as steel, and slashing claws to match. Their teeth can bite through bone as well as sinew. Their speed is on a par with a dark kin, if not more so. And they never give up when they have the scent of their quarry. Blind and aggressive, they hunt via smell alone, and can detect more than even canines, even at several miles distance. When they get to grips with their target, they go into a feeding frenzy. A desperation to consume their opponent overwhelms them, giving them greater preternatural speed to their flurry of blows. Just think of a bulletproof golem who has not eaten in months, and you might get somewhere close to the fear these things can create. Archons will train them to the point of being their attack dogs. They will hunt down any the Archon indicates, and defend him with the passion of a doting pet. Though the realm of Shaddam has been destroyed, these beings are bred and kept in ready supply by the Dark Kin. The Medusae. As far as I am aware, they are one of only two beings that call the Webway dimension their natural home. One of them is the Psychnuin, the other are the Medusae. Resembling floating brains tied together with cords of flesh containing hyper-dense neural pathways, the Medusae are empathic parasites and predators. Able to attach themselves to a sentient being, they can take control and ride them like you or I would a remote-controlled vehicle. Most often, this attachment is permanent. Those few who have had a Medusae detached from them and survived have reported that it felt like they could discern the emotions of all around them, but also that the emotions they experienced while being possessed were vastly amplified. So much so that fewer of these few who survive are actually even approaching sane. The Medusa has many assets that make it a must for any Archon. In combat, they are able to throw out a close-range field of anti-light that causes victims to fall into a contra-empathic coma. Simply put, their gaze is so potent, they are such powerful empaths that they can overload the senses of their targets until their minds just shut down. But this is not the most important benefit of the Medusae. Amidst their multiple cortexes, along each side of the being proper, there are small tendrils. Like plums or other fruit, they can be harvested with no ill effect to the Medusa. When a Dark Eldar consumes one of these growths, then they can relive the moment contained within. Like video recorders, they capture a moment perfectly, permitting the consumer to immerse themselves in every emotion of an event, like tidal waves. The memories of emotions of pain and sorrow, horror and loss can all be experienced with perfect and even enhanced clarity. Thus do many an Archon keep these beings beside them in battle, so that they can relive the moment again and again, gaining sustenance from it as much as the Medusae themselves. Most often attached to a slave host, the Medusae are prized members of an Archon's court. Their sustenance, entertainment, and a deadly last line of defense, for even a space marine cannot resist their empathic force. Now we come to the last, but far, far from the least, the Slith. The Slith are an old race, and amongst the deadliest killers in the galaxy. Serpentine, but with a humanoid torso, they have 4 arms and a snake-like head. Their bottom half is a long, scaled trunk that is powerfully built of pure muscles. More agile than one would think, they can rise like cobras to tower over their opponents, and they have the reaction speed to match. Despite their visage, the Slith are a very intelligent race, and often multilingual. The difficulty in any encounter with the Slith will not be their ability to understand. It will be their intractable nature and preponderance to slaughter anything they perceive as weaker than themselves. The Slith are a star-spanning species that have fought against humanity time and again, once doing so in a collective with other Xenos to take some measure of revenge against the all-conquering human race. They have 4 arms and can use them quadridextrously, meaning that they can use a weapon in each hand with equal skill. Most have a combination of shard carbines and splinter pistols for range, and a slith battle blade or multiple for close quarters combat. But they can use whatever they wish with equal skill. Even an Astartes, a space marine, will be hard pushed to best an enraged slith. Their strength, speed, and sheer size make them able to crush a man with their bare hands. If pushed, they can constrict around a foe and smash every bone in their body in a similar way. But their intelligence and ability in close makes them unpredictable, adaptable, and thus incredibly deadly. Now some have thrown an immediate parallel between the slith and the species known as the lair, the ones who had fallen entirely to Slaanesh and were annihilated by the Emperor's Children Legion during the Great Crusade. The same race who held the lair blade that corrupted the Primarch Fulgrim. The similarities are striking indeed. But others have covered this in greater detail. Links in the description. The Slith are known mercenaries, but have so far never been successfully hired by any humans. It could be a deep-rooted detestation of humanity, or it could be that they simply do not get offered a correct price for their services. But who would know what a Slith would require in payment? A Dark Eldar would. For they are of the same ilk, and it takes a scumbag to buy a scumbag. But, to be simple and brief, most often they are paid in slaves and sensual experiences, so much like the lair again. The Archon who has Slith warriors in his court is blessed indeed, for they are faster than most Dark Eldar, considerably more physically powerful, and, unlike every other denizen of the Dark City, they are loyal to a fault. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Like and subscribe, tip if you are feeling generous, but most importantly of all, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.